My hands stable, I feel able to turn the tables. I could do this, just keep moving, keep your hands up, stupid. I feel lucid, a new viewing. I can see the end, I can see my future, I can view it. It's right there for the taking. Everything I've ever wanted, dreams are just waiting. I just gotta fight for it, willing to die for it, willing to like sort of.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000, it still sucks. This is Philip J. Price, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show, your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'm Daniel. Alongside with me, as always, Jaime and Big Blue. Boys, how you guys doing tonight? We'll start off with you. Jaime, how's your night going, my man?
It's going pretty good, man. It's going pretty good. And
that's good.
I'm gonna try my best not to say that. Let's see how that works.
Oh, that's gonna be kind of tough. Big Blue, how's your night going, man?
Good, man. Just relaxing for a little bit, and I got to work tonight, so be another busy day.
Good deal, man. Well, hopefully you don't get too crazy tonight. We got a special guest in. Oh, was that Big Blue?
Just drinking a soda tonight. Nothing crazy.
Just drinking a soda.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's good, man. I'm just drinking water. Well, we have a special guest tonight. His name is Steve. He is a retired law enforcement officer. He has 20 years of service. He's worked in jail, railroad patrol, and investigations. He was a SWAT team leader, entry leader, and has experience as a crime scene investigator. His name is Steve. He also has a YouTube show called True Crime Web. Welcome to the show, Steve. How are you doing, man?
I am doing great, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to tonight.
Yes.
Welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you did the CSI stuff. How did you get involved in CSI?
Well, when years ago, the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training, back in the late 80s, they decided to come out with a crime scene investigation training course. This was pre-CSI. This was before CSI was cool. And so they designed this course, and they put it out there. And it was supposed to be funded by the state, that officers that completed the course would get additional paying along with their other, county employment. So I saw that, and I said, more money, simple job, let's go for it. And so I started the training. It took about 2 years to get all the courses completed, and I was in the initial graduating class of crime scene technicians, is what they called us at that time. And I think there's like 20 or 30 of us in that initial graduating class in the around 90 or 91, I think.
Good deal. And once you ended up going through those courses, was it long before you were at your first scene that you were investigating forensically?
Well, what happens in law enforcement, of course, as you go through, and once you become on, you start your career off jail, road or otherwise, from those first calls, you're going to be answering calls for natural deaths, accidents, self-harm to homicides. And so by the time you get into the investigative part of it, you're exposed to, multitude of different types of crime scenes and victims and bodies. And so even before I had that certification, I had seen my fair share of just about every different type of crime that you can imagine, and body.
Oh, geez. Yeah, now I can imagine. I've come up against some pretty crazy crime scenes myself. I've never my career in law enforcement, I never did the forensic stuff, the investigatory things. I was just a patrol officer for a few years there. So let's talk about Delphi. Delphi is a case that with Richard Allen, and is a case that's gotten a lot of publicity here in the for the last 5 years because it was unsolved. And then few months ago, almost a year ago now, Richard Allen gets arrested. It was kind of a surprise to everybody. He gets arrested. There's a probable cause affidavit that, in my opinion, at that time, kind of, I thought it was him. Pretty simple stuff. And then all of a sudden, the defense comes out with some pretty outlandish claims based on the images that you have seen. If you were there that first day, walking up on the scene, and you were the CSI investigator involved to investigate that scene, what would have been your first thoughts? Like, how would you have approached the scene, and what would you have done?
There's a lot of things that go on, and I think Holman, or whatever the lead investigator at the time, says that it's chaos, and that's the case. From the first responding officer that gets there, he's there right after the victims have been discovered. Doesn't matter if it's Delphi or Idaho or wherever. That those first responding officers, they carry a large part of what follows, and so they'll set up a location, and they're supposed to do certain steps. But when the CSI or the investigator gets there, he gets briefed. He starts his visual analysis and evaluation of the scene, trying to figure out which way did the offender enter, which way did the offender leave, for the fact that we have to take alternate routes. We do anything that you do to a scene has high risk of having a large impact on what evidence is collected. So it's very difficult, especially in an outdoor environment type of crime scene like Delphi. You got leaves, you got multiple game trails, you got creek. There's so much stuff that comes in, and then you had search teams that were in that area. So it'd be extremely difficult. But once you set up those, and that first officer and then the first investigators get there, and they start setting up the crime scene tape from the first line of defense, and then you have your outer boundaries set up so that you move people back, you move the press back, and then you create that staging area where all responding officers and the supporting elements arrive, and then they're organized, and it's just a chain of events that you train for, and hopefully it leads to a quick ending to the investigations. But some cases you'll have these cold cases that are 6 years to be solved or never solved.
Yeah, 100%. And so in this case, if you were to be walking up to the scene, you yourself, we spoke about this, off camera, but you have seen the crime scene photos that have been leaked out, or at least some variation of them. Is that correct?
Yes, the images that I've seen are just a couple of images that are a snapshot in time. We have no idea of what happened before that single image of the two images that we have that I've seen, and so we don't know what happened 10 seconds before, 10 minutes, or 10 hours before. So there could be a lot of processing that happened, and because there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of images of that crime scene. And there's going to be video. There may be 3D imaging, because they had the resources of the whole country. Once you get the FBI involved and you got your state labs, it's more than just some backwoods CSI guy with a camera and a marker and a paper bag.
Right.
You've got all the technologies in the world at your fingertips.
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie, for your $3.99 super sticker. So basically what you're saying is you don't know when those pictures were taken, if the bodies have been moved by that point, because obviously the bodies are going to be moved eventually. And throughout that entire process, there's photos being taken. So yes, it's unknown at what time during that process that those photos were taken.
Yes. The picture of Abby looks like in natural light, daytime. You have sunshine, you have shadows, and of course you can see Abby, and you see a portion of Libby. But in the second image of that, or there appears to be an image that has some artificial lighting that's made of Libby that more than likely is in lower light conditions.
Got you. And so based on the images that you had seen and of the bodies, and based on your experience at looking at deceased, was there any sign of, I guess, if the bodies were ever at one point hung upside down or anything like that?
Not that I saw. Now, if you look at what the 136 page affidavit, everything that you need to understand about those photos is described in that 136 pages. Even the part about that they appear that, and I don't go to the extreme that there absolutely was clean, but I would tend to agree with the defense that there was far less blood pattern and blood trails than what I would expect at such a scene.
Really interesting. And I know you and
Jamie's got a question down here.
Go ahead, Jamie. Hi, man.
Well, I was trying to get your attention there.
My bad, my man.
Steve, you said that the outdoor environment was really tricky, right? Because of the elements itself. What's the best way to contain like the scene in pristine condition?
Well, there's, like I said, the first responding officer that gets there, of course, we're talking about a trail, and I've been to the scene, and it's extremely difficult to get to. It's not an easy path to get to, you know. And so that whenever you're approaching it, and ever how you're led into there, you'll mark that trail by memory or otherwise, and you try to go that one path. Now, if that one path is determined that, oh, this is the way the offender either came to the scene or left through the scene, we're going to have to come up with a new path. And you got that crime scene tape, and you'll just zone it off and say, follow the tape to the crime scene, which is separate from any path that would more than likely be used by the offender, because you don't want to be walking over the same path that he took. And it's a wild guess sometimes, but you go through areas that are not natural trails or where people walk, you know, you may have to do a little bit of do some landscaping work and cut your way through some brush and stuff, but you always come up with an alternate path.
When it comes down to the bodies itself, would the rain get rid of DNA or even fingerprints at that point? Would they put like a canopy over the bodies itself to keep it from
there's a lot of choices that have to be made. For every time that you approach a victim, there's a potential of impact on evidence to that. Now, they have canines now that are trained to even help assist processing scenes that look for certain types of evidence. That's something that came along after my career. And it's not like what you see on TV where everything's handled within an hour and you can process. You know, there's sometimes that you'll see a piece of evidence that's 15 feet away, and it may take an hour to get to it, for the fact that you don't want to have an impact on anything between you and the whatever the item is. And then you have two victims, which complicates it, because which victim do we process first? Which one is going to have the least amount of impact on the other's crime scene? Because each victim is a crime scene by themselves, standalone. And so you've got to process one of them before you get to the other. And choices have to be made.
Good deal. So I'm going to bring up this image. This image was one that was drawn by Rick Snee, Delphi After Dark, who is a guy who's also seen the image as well. Does this seem like an accurate just visual of what was at the scene that you have seen?
Probably 90-something% accurate. My opinion, and when anyone looks at the images, everybody's going to see something different, and they're going to analyze it and evaluate it and give each item a little bit of weight. I think there's a couple of additions into the picture to the left of the screen, but if you was on the ground laying face up, it'd be to the right side, which is the image depicting Abby. The limb that's near her right shoulder going down is not what is in my observation of it, is not on the ground. It's a limb that is separate, that's hanging from a tree that just happened to be in the frame. It does have the appearance it's on the ground, but I do not believe it is on the ground. I'm going with the defense says that there was 3 sticks, limbs, and from the lighting and everything about that photograph, I do not think the one near the right shoulder, the one on Abby, is correct. Or I did not see any antlers or any sticks resembling antlers.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, he had said that Rick Snay said that out of the pictures he saw, he did see some sticks over Abby's head, but he called them more like antenna looking. Now
there may be
go ahead.
more images than what I saw,
Right?
and I may have a different set. I don't know.
So do you think that these branches were more just to like cover the body so it wouldn't be so noticeable?
Well, in the investigative world, and I think it's even been noted that some of the officers says that they thought it was random. My looking at it, I do not think they're random. I think there was a ritual or a signature. And in the world of law enforcement and processing of scenes and the training that we have of evaluating these things, that people will, like I said, you'll look at these and you'll have to decide, is this a signature ritual? Just because I say that doesn't mean it's pagan, doesn't mean it's part of any type of cult. That it can be in the mind of the offender that he's doing something outside the crime that's necessary, but he's signing, he's marking his territory. These are my victims. Each of these are mine, and this is how I show you that they're mine. And placing of these sticks, which I do not believe is random. I believe that, you have a 90-degree angle formed by 2 sticks on the left shoulder, and then you have a stick that runs from 11 to 5 on each shoulder, on each victim. So 3 of the 4 sticks is absolutely within a certain intersecting pattern that I don't think would ever happen randomly.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Yeah, that was one of the questions that I had was, were these sticks obviously something that appeared to be put out there to some sort of symbol? Do you think that the body positions were also purposely placed in that position as a form of a symbol? When I look at, for instance, the body that's supposed to represent Libby, it almost appears as if somebody was dragging her by one arm. And then when I look at the body that's supposed to be Abby, that would be a position if you were carrying somebody. And I can see if maybe perhaps if rigor set in or something and their arms got stuck. But do you think that the body positions were also purposeful and staged?
I believe so. And like I said, it's my personal opinion, but it to me, my first impression, and like I said, you may have 5 or 6 investigators there, and just because that's what one investigator says doesn't mean that it's absolute. There's great discussions and debates around the table. But my impression is that yes, there was some postmortem staging, posing of each of the victims.
Gotcha.
Somebody's asking if these were branches or part of like a fence post or planks, because I've been told they're like branches.
Yeah, most of these limbs, just going from memory, I think are less than 2 inches in diameter. They may be 2.5, 3 inches, but all 90% of them. The only one that is larger than that is the one that's on Libby that you can see here. And it's probably, just guessing, it may be up to 6 inches in diameter.
Oh, gotcha. And man, I was going to ask you a question. I can't forget. It just completely slipped my mind.
It gets worse as you get older.
Yeah. The bodies, one was said that they had blood dripped. Did it appear that it was like blood dripping all over? Was it Libby's body? Is that what was described? Is that what it appeared from you? Is that it was purposefully dripped on her?
The images of her are not the best. Plus, there's some redactions.
Gotcha.
Of some areas that were redacted on her, and then we don't, like I said, are there possibilities that there is some 90-degree and some type of transfer stains on her? Absolutely. But it's not the best of pictures, and we'll find out a lot of that when the CSIs that process the scene will be able to describe them, and they'll have some better pictures, although we may never get to see them, but we'll have what they describe.
I know Jaime had a question. He's coming.
I was coughing my lungs out, man. Sorry about that. What's it
Can
called?
you
Yeah.
hear me?
No, I think you're gonna have to jump out, Danny, and come back in. Steve, I was gonna ask you. I know I think there was 136 pages of the document, right? And I believe they mentioned that one of the branches looked like it was actually cut. Do you think the person that committed this crime would have used what the branches on his surroundings, or do you think he would like bring cut branches or sticks from another place and use those if he's doing purposely putting those sticks in those positions to make it seem like a ritualistic killing?
I know that they mentioned that it looks like it was done with a electric saw. I did some testing on that, and of course, if it's from the scene, and there's a lot of different types of knives and cutting tools that can be part of your personal daily carry, as far as certain knife types, and so it is possible he could cut it on the scene. Now, did he bring some type of electric saw? I highly doubt it. But and if he did, there will be evidence of that at the scene. You'll have the sawdust. You'll be able to identify the limb that the tree came from, and every part and everything. And regardless if the limb was cut there or if it's cut somewhere else, there was a purpose for his cutting of it.
Yeah. I just find it hard to believe that, after this person committed the crime, he will spend that much time collecting these branches and then still putting them in these positions. You know what I mean? Because especially because you have the scene where it's at. It might not be as trafficked, so much traffic by people, but you do have people out there hiking, at the time probably hunting or doing stuff or fishing because there's a creek right there. I don't think he would take the time to cut or break or put them in that position.
That's something that and that's part of what drives and trying to rationalize what some of these people do that commit these crimes is that us in the normal realm of being average citizens, that we can't place ourselves in that if this is part of his fantasy and he has to do something to fulfill that fantasy, he will do it. Doesn't matter if it's cutting a limb, doesn't matter if it's whatever he has to do to finalize his whatever is his mission to complete that scene in his fantasy, he will do, even taking the time of putting himself in extreme danger. You look at Ted Bundy. He put himself in extreme danger by going to the same beach twice in one day and leading two victims to their death. High risk. And these people, like I said, they will do anything and everything to fulfill their fantasy. And it's hard for us to try to rationalize and say that this is what we will or what is normal, because it is extremely difficult.
Do you think that by him, like you said, cutting these branches and putting them in this position, do you think that's like his type of like souvenir, I guess you could say?
And that's a great point, for the fact that if he did this and he was staging them, and he was taking the time to cut limbs and to place them in this, and we have a portion of the FBI that in their affidavit of the search warrant for Logan that supports this, because they said that they expect that the offender would memorialize this by either photography or some type of electronic device, such as a cell phone or otherwise. They were expecting, and they did expect that at some point they would be able to find that digital footprint or of him either taking a picture somewhere or having it on some type of device, a computer, thumb drive, whatever. And so and that leads you to believe that not only was there posing, staging, signature, oddities at the scene. Even I've said that there's most certainly something that you would want to take pictures of, and it's something that he would expect that you would see as a serial offender.
When it comes down to the crime scene itself, the leaves, what would happen? You know, how would you, I guess, assess the crime scene knowing that there's all this debris on the floor? Because I know that I believe it on that day it was, you know, rainy, kind of like in the, you know, cloudy and cold day. I know the ground will be, you know, wet at some point. How would you assess that to make sure that you can find all these footprints around the bodies?
Well, you work yourself from outside in. You know, we can see where some of the investigators were over near the creek bank, and of course, you'll do that grid search as you'll do that mental and visual evaluation of the whole scene, and make sure that well, we know that or possibly, I don't know exactly what time they realized that the girls had been on the bridge, but just as soon as they realize that, they're going to be trying to determine how did these victims get here, and they'll look, and if they see which on the victim on the clothing that was on Abby, there is indications of the route taken to the scene of mud. And so where do you find mud? The creek. So they would go there and make sure that we look at footprints, handprints, elbows, knees, shoe prints, whatever's there. And then, of course, you collect and that evidence and make sure it's ready for court. And it's a long process. And like I said, processing this scene in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, I would expect, you know, 4 or 5 days to be able to completely make sure we have everything.
Now, I had a question. The branches that were on the bodies, given the fact that the bodies aren't like 2D, they're 3D, the proportions are different. You don't think that maybe some of the sticks may have moved?
Yes, it's possible. Absolutely. I mean, did they? But like I said, each of them, that if we have each of them has a stick across the wounds of the throat or near the throat. And then they go 90 degrees off of the left shoulder. And then we have that 11-5. And they're very, very close in proximity in the two images. And so, not saying I'm absolutely right, but that would be my argument to the investigative team that this is what, even if they have moved, and they may have moved 4 or 5 inches, who knows what would have happened during the night, what animal interactions, because there was deer in the area. And you may have coyotes, you may have raccoons, we know what's in the forest. And, some of those animals are not very friendly to other animals.
Right.
Yeah, I think in one of the couple of pictures, actually, I believe, Danny, right, that we saw a house cat. Pretty close to that scene.
Somewhere in the there was I think there was a cat that was taken. There's pictures where you could see the crime scene. And this is from a while ago, and up on the hill you can see like an orange cat or cat up there. So I was like, animals being around there, if they would have maybe have touched things or moved things. So there's the this ruin that looks like an F, or a ruin that looks like an F that was being claimed by the defense, right? You've done some work on the tree itself. I'm gonna bring up some images that you had sent me.
I made one on this tree behind me. I cut it off and brought it into my, and that's the tree I did some of the F tree testing.
Oh, okay, okay. And so you did you used synthetic blood, and what exactly? What did you do with this test? Describe the test.
Well, the looking at the images of the released image of the F tree, you see this line that is 90 degrees straight up and down. Here it is. And looking at that, that appears to me as a passive blood flow. A passive blood flow is something that's affected, that there is a sustained injury, and that blood comes in contacts and gravity takes over and it just runs down the face of a tree, or it can be pooling on a flat surface if it was a floor or something. But it's just a passive blood flow. There's no other influence on it other than gravity and surface tensions. And so that looked what that appeared to me as being. And so I have painted on some of my tests and earlier tests. I painted on an F and processed it both photography and daylight, and then hit with luminol, and able to paint an F in the synthetic blood. And then also on this one behind me, I was able to complete this test. And this test is simply that if you can imagine that you're walking up to a tree or whatever, and you're going to brace yourself, and you grab that tree in this manner, you just, and that if you had a defensive injury to your thumb, and that there's sustained blood flow from that for every heartbeat, there's sustained blood flow that would come down into your webbing and then run down the face of the tree, it would create that linear 90, gravity fed passive flow. And so I went to the tree. I simulated having an injury to my thumb with my synthetic blood with a straw, and I released enough blood to fill up and seeing the passive flow going down the tree. And so I just removed my hand, came down 3 inches, retouched the tree, and pulled my hand off. And this is the results. That in daylight, you don't see it. But when you turn off the lights, or the moon sets or the sun sets, and you're under cloudy light conditions, low light conditions, then you can hit it with luminol. And now we don't know what this looks like in luminol. Just like this here. You can't see that F on this tree right here behind me. But the exact same thing. Uh-oh.
Gotcha. No, I put you there.
But even in those conditions of that bright light, when you turn it off and you hit it with the luminol and the glow's there, then you can run it through some filters and give it that really bright image that I give you. In the first photographs of that luminous of the blue that you see here on the right is the first generation. You run it through filters, run up contrast, brightness, and things, and then you'll make it stand out like this.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with this F here, or image that looks like an F on the tree, it was described to have been drawn on with Libby's blood. So do you think that was Libby holding on to the tree?
I think it was her holding on to it, and it's simple as that. Now, I did go back and paint an F on a tree. Now, it took me, I had to reintroduce, because there's not, the fingertip is a very poor, if that's what was used, ink quill. That if you go to get blood and then you just scratch on it to get that heavy flow straight up and down, for me to complete the F, I had to dip my finger in the synthetic blood 7, 8, 9 times to be able to draw an F, versus just sticking my hand up there for 2 or 3 seconds and then replying my hand for a second, and I have an F.
Yeah, down here on the right side of this image, there appears to be almost a handprint in blood, or at least 2 fingers. Is that what you see there?
Yeah, anything, like I said, I don't know if, and that's the thing, that in crime scene, a lot of people are saying, well, there's no scale or no measurement in here. And there's a process of taking photographs. that before you introduce the scale for measurement, you get it in its most natural environment, that you haven't introduced anything to it. So this would be, in the crime scene world, a photo taken 30 seconds or a minute prior to introducing a measuring scale. And that's what I'm saying. We just get a snapshot of whatever the shutter speed is at that time, and we don't know what happened before or after.
Right. What, as a crime scene investigator, if you were on this scene and you saw this bloody, I don't want to say symbol, but this bloody image on this tree, would you be taking that piece of bark with you? Would you just take samples and pictures? What would you do to process this image?
Of course, just what they do in its natural environment. Before you do anything, you have to work yourself to that point. And so by the time you get to this tree, and if it's away from where the other evidence has already been processed, victims, and you've processed the ground under it, so that when you walk up to it, that, because I think in the 136th page, they said that there was blood spatter and a blood pattern at the base of this tree. And so you've got to go in there and look at that and collect and see if because anything that's on the ground, it's hard to tell. And you don't know, is this just the victim's blood or is it the offender's also? Is there a mixture here? Especially with edged weapons, a lot of times the offenders will injure themselves. And so you have to go in there and process the ground and collect whatever you think is best for the case. And then you'll work your way up to being able to photograph this thing. And you'll photograph it in its natural condition. And you'll wait till dark and you'll luminol, because it may point to something. You don't know what's there until it's dark and you hit it with that presumptive test, which luminol is a presumptive test also, but it also is a great luminescent that in total darkness, that you'll see so much more than what you would see in this natural light.
Right.
And then after you get all that done and you get those pictures made, then in my personal book, I get out the chainsaw.
So in this situation, it's been, I don't know how true it is, but there's been rumors there that they left the blood-stained tree alone for more than a day, and then I think they'd only taken samples. Do you think that could ruin this case / could that really hurt the case if that ended up being the truth?
No, now it will be in, if they had missteps, and everybody messes up on crime scenes. There's so many thousands of decisions that have to be made each and every movement. And sometimes evidence gets destroyed. Sometimes evidence gets overlooked, and not trying to defend them. No way, shape, form, or fashion. Because if they messed up on this, they're going to have to pay dearly when they're on that stand, because there's nothing more than a defense attorney wants than to make the expert look like a fool, because it puts so much pressure that if you mishandle this, you look at the OJ trial, what did that dream team do to the law enforcement? I mean, they ate them alive, and that's what they'll try to do on this one. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, for the fact that you don't want that jury to have any confidence in law enforcement and the techniques and the training and what they did at the scene to carry any weight. And so it's a very difficult task to collect evidence.
If Richard Allen is the sole person that committed this crime, it sounds like he didn't leave any DNA behind, because based on the probable cause affidavit, which I would assume, most probable cause affidavits that I'm going to come across at the time of the arrest, that's a lot of the evidence that's being used against the offender. I know that it's not everything in there. Obviously, they don't put everything, but they put a lot in there. And my question is, based on that, I wouldn't think that there's DNA, because I think they would have used that against him for his arrest. So Is that what you're seeing here as well?
Yes, I absolutely agree with what you're saying with that. But I also believe that there is DNA that they haven't found yet that's on the clothing. And it's extremely hard to find DNA. I had to send a airbag off the passenger in a vehicle. And we're talking about an airbag that has a surface that came in contact with my offender that was probably 18 inches by 24 inches. And on that bag, I knew it had contact with the offender who killed the driver. But I had to send it off 5 times before we found the DNA transfer that was identifiable to the offender that wasn't part of the victim's blood pattern, that when he got shot, the blood spatter came back and onto the passenger airbag. And so during that process, every time I sent it to the lab, they kept testing blood drops. And it took me on the 5th trip before, I think it was around the 5th trip before they finally got away from the blood and went to a different type of stain that looked more oily, lighter, and in that stain they were able to find the offender's DNA.
Wow. The only thing about that is I think that if, with so much question marks right now that the defense has put out there publicly, if they were to find DNA evidence of Richard Allen at this point, I think some people might be a little bit suspicious. How often does that happen that, it's found, so close to when court is supposed to start? I mean, court's supposed to happen in less than a couple of months now.
Well, like I said, we have advances in technologies. We have advances in DNA. When I first came into and we was getting the training back in the late 80s, I think it was around 85 or 86 before DNA was ever even allowed into the first court. And so it was a new technology at that point. And the processing has changed so much. And we are still at the doorsteps of where DNA will eventually go to, and where technologies will be in the future. And so they may be able, the new technology comes out tomorrow, and they're able to look back at that clothing that they removed from Abby and find new DNA. And, there's processes every day. And if that's the case, then the courts will have to rule upon it and go with it. But I agree that if they do find anything in the next month or two or year, that yes, it'll have to be entered into court, presented by people that understand the process and how it could have evaded discovery up to this point.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I think that can end up being pretty. It'd be pretty suspicious at this point. One of the other things that was looked at for the arrest of Richard Allen was the ballistics on the unspent round. Apparently, it matched the extraction marks of a weapon that was found at his home. Have you ever used that type of technology? Have you ever heard of extraction marks on a unspent round as having unique identifiers to the point where it would be used in trial against somebody?
I haven't in any of the cases I work, but it's not junk science. There's people serving time for this. And the experts that will have to testify to this, will they be able to pass the grade and the voir dire from both the or from the defense of what their training is and how they evaluated, and are those characteristics from the bullet enough to identify it coming from that specific gun. But we also have to look at that. Is it possible that within the Allen household, he still had the original box or lot number that ammo came from? And what components are aligned with the bullet that's from the crime scene? Is it the same powder, chemical analysis, casing, primer? All of that can be part of not just the the characteristics of the markings from that particular firearm, but there's other things that can link lots of ammo to one another.
Good deal. Good deal. So you think that it's good, and that's going to be something that Richard Allen's going to have to explain.
Absolutely.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, because when it comes to this case, I think that the more that time has come on, I'll be honest, the probable cause affidavit seems, I don't want to say weak, but what do they have on him? They have the bullet. They have his testimony that claims he was there. And that's basically all that we know. According to the defense team and their 136-page documents, there's nothing forensically that ties him there. There's nothing DNA-wise that ties him there or to the victims. None of his, devices put him there, and there wasn't any souvenirs found at his home. And apparently, the testimony that he gave was they have lost the written portion of it, I guess, and or they never had a written statement from him. And the conservation officers are going based off of memory as to when he had said he was going to be there. How strong do you think this case is?
It's strong enough that it convinced the judge not to let him have bail. And so, am I biased? I spent most of my life trusting other officers and sworn testimony. But you can look in throughout histories, and mistakes have been made. But I honestly believe they have a really good case. I think they have far more than what we know. And at least I hope so, for the fact if they don't, then it will be a sad day for our court systems. I think Jamie has a question there.
I was going to say CNN is reporting that the Robert Card, the main shooting suspect, sources are saying that he's been found deceased.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of expected that was going to be the outcome on that.
They're going to probably have a press conference in a little bit.
Oh, well, thanks for letting us know, my man.
But what's it called? Also, when it comes down to DNA itself, if the victims were, touched before coming down the hill and through the river, how much would that DNA be lost after passing through that river?
Oh, water is not friendly to DNA. Yes, and was that intentionally that that was part of the process? Who knows? I would expect more than likely we'll find out, if it's ever found out, that was just part of the flight. Anytime that you do an abduction, and it's always bothered me, even from the first time I went there, that you don't abduct anyone, children or anyone, unless you have a place to take them. And where would that place be? And so we may have a place that we are unaware of that he was going to take them. And there may be evidence of that we just are not aware of. And this is something that the victims didn't cooperate, and they created a separate crime scene from what and disrupted the offender's plans.
Yeah. I know they were saying that there was a lack of blood, right, from one of the victims. Do you think maybe the crime itself happened inside that creek, and that the blood got washed away?
Well, and I did some testing with Mrs. Steve. My wife. That's the name my community gave my wife, and I did some testing with her. It's extremely difficult to move a victim of Abby's size. The average man wouldn't be, that'd be above what the average man could move. And so my theory is that if it happened up on the plateau, that the Libby and Abby crossed the creek under their own power, climbed up out of the creek, and was on the plateau when the final confrontation, crime scene, and homicides occurred, that yes, we can have a lone wolf. But if it happened down in the creek, it would take an extremely strong individual to lift someone almost 200 pounds up out of that creek.
Yeah.
Yeah, and water too.
When it comes down to the to the spent, not the spent, the bullet itself. Do you think that would it be possible for that handgun when getting put back maybe into his jacket, it might have cocked back and extracted that round?
That's a possibility, or it could have been during a struggle that one of the victims was able to get their hand on the slide and was able to rack it, or he tried during the encounter. He tried to fire and it misfired, and he just racked another round. I don't know. Or he's one of those people that after a gun is loaded, before he moves, if he's trained, some individuals will not holster a weapon that has one in the chamber, and that he just simply racked out to an empty chamber to carry. Some people do that. I don't know if that's his case or not.
Yeah.
When it comes to the possibility of somebody else, you mentioned that you think that if the bodies were dragged from, the river and pulled upwards, that you think that it was possibly multiple people. You said there was leaves around the bodies. Did any of them leaves appear to have had dragging marks? I know that the defense said that one of them did.
Yeah, part of my test was to see what type of marks that you would see, not only on the leaf pattern, but on the victim's clothing or on their body. If you're dragged, you'll have markings from the ground surface onto either your skin or injuries to your skin, or you'll have drag marks on your clothing, and then you have some disruption of the ground surface, leaves, twigs, things turned over. And we really don't have a good image, and you really can't tell a lot about that leaf pattern from the angle. We only have one angle of from Abby that shows anything beyond her feet, and it doesn't look like it's clearly identified as a drag pattern, so we don't know. But I personally think that the homicides occurred within 15 to 25 feet of where they were found. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think I don't think the homicides occurred in the creek. I only say that if it did, it was more than one offender. If it's not, then it's a lone wolf possibility.
Now, do you think that the reason why maybe the bodies weren't moved too much to another place was because they got interrupted by the dad searching for him? Maybe they heard the names being called out.
It could have been the dad searching for him, or it could have been the residents across the street as he returned. I think within that time frame, he was coming home to check on the property directly across the creek. And I know that when I was there at the scene and he came home one afternoon, he stopped and he looked right at us from his driveway. I mean, it's a clear shot from where the victims were to where if he was coming home, he could look down upon the victims.
Oh, I didn't know it was that close.
Well, it's not that close. It's about 75 to 80 yards, but it's he stopped. He saw us.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that makes me also kind of think that, there could have been somebody else involved is the statements from Elvis Fields. They're kind of eye-opening. Some of the things that his sister is claiming that he had said, which she passed the polygraph for, which, those things are not completely 100% accurate all the time. But, when it says that somebody's usually telling the truth, it usually can get a false lie. But when somebody's telling the truth, that's difficult. They usually have to have quite a bit of training to do so. And I don't think that Elvis Fields' sister does. So, those comments are questioning for me. Also the stature of Richard Allen. He seems like a very small guy to be moving these bodies back and forth. That's a bit of a question mark as well. Do you think that, you mentioned earlier that you thought that it did appear that the staging did seem like it was at least appearing to be ritualistic. Would that have been of your thoughts at the scene the first time you arrived, that this was a ritualistic type of incident?
I would have thought, yes, that we have some type of ritual signature of we have deliberate placement of this. Not so much, like I said, that's pagan or otherwise, but that something made this offender choose this pattern, lay these sticks in this order across the injuries, 90 degrees, 11 to 5, and it happened twice. But and like I said, that's just something I saw. Other people may look at it and see 20 different things, but that was just my opinion of it.
Gotcha. Do you guys any more questions on Delphi before we move to the Idaho questions that we have?
When they, what's the probability of getting a partial print off of a casing?
I've done it. I've gotten it. You can be lucky, and also you got touch DNA on that. Loading a magazine takes. It depends where, especially if it's one of the first ones into the gun. If he's got a full magazine loaded, putting those final rounds, the top off that magazine takes some pressure. Yeah. And so if you're going to get good DNA transfer, you would expect under the shell casing, edge of that casing, as you push that round back, that's when you're going to find some skin cell transfers. And but we don't, like you said, it was the ground outdoor conditions may have diluted that DNA profile.
So they were saying that what kind of gun was it? I can't remember.
It's a 6R. Wasn't it a 6R?
Yeah, I think it was. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it was a
228 or something, I think.
And that's what he has too, right? He owns that. So it'll be a lot easier to match it to that gun than to actually match the bullet to a gun that wouldn't be found, right?
Well, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that guns can be connected, either by the ammo lot or by cycling through. Now, if it had been fired, it would have probably had a lot more characteristics from the breech facing, from the ejector, from, there's a lot of things that come in contact with that are made of steel that come in contact with that casing, which is a softer metal, brass, and will leave those distinctive characteristics on those surfaces. And every time a gun is assembled and the tools are used, such as the drills and whatever it takes to make each part of that gun, that round, as it's fed into that chamber, there's certain parts of it have contact with that sulfur brass and can leave characteristics.
You mentioned earlier that that there was a lack of blood, in your opinion, from the scene.
Yes.
And you don't see that around the area. So the possibilities are that it occurred, significantly further down away, and that there's blood somewhere, or that it happened in the river, or it was collected. I think those are pretty much like the three possibilities of where that blood could have been. If collected, then that was premeditated that was going to happen there. They would have had to have taken tools. There wasn't like a bucket or anything on the bridge guy that he was holding. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have to be careful that we don't know. The FBI addressed it in their affidavit by this, that due to the amount of blood at the scene, it would be obvious that the offender would have a transfer of blood on him. So the FBI in their affidavit says that, yes, there's a lot of blood there. Now, the defense goes with the opposite pole, that no, there's none. And so the truth is somewhere in the middle. And if you have an injury and you're laying on the ground, you can have everything from arterial spray, spurting that will go across leaves. But if you don't have a real good, and if that didn't occur and you just have an injury that's bleeding out on the ground, you may have a very narrow blood flow, and it's covered and it's under the leaf pattern, and you just don't see it in the photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And we just don't know. I've done that. I'm a hunter, and I've taken game, And, and I've, during the process of harvesting a deer, a lot of times you won't have all that blood on the surface. That, of course, it'll go up under the leaf cover.
So, one more question on Delphi before we move on. And this was something that you had brought up earlier as well. You mentioned that when it comes to like a kidnapping or an abduction of some sort, there's usually some sort of plan, where they're going to take them or whatnot. In this case, we know that there's an apparent, there's a Hoosier Harvester camera that captures a vehicle that looks like Richard Allen's traveling westbound on 300 North towards the old CPS building. My question was always, why is he traveling that direction? His home and Delphi and his workplace are all west of the old CPS building, and there is significantly faster ways of travel there, unless he's trying to avoid some sort of detection. But the other thought I had is, well, it was supposedly a warmer day that day, and he was dressed pretty heavy to the point where a lot of folks thought that maybe he was trolling that morning looking for victims since the early morning. And, my thoughts were, if this was some sort of premeditated thing where he knew that the girls were going to be there and he had planned some sort of ritualistic stuff, that he may be up there earlier that morning. And one clear area to get to this area in Ronald Logan's property is the cemetery. And so if he, the three juveniles that saw him walking in stated that he was walking with a purpose. My opinion is just kind of putting everything together. If he was at what would be the scene later and gets word that the girls are on their way and he needed to get there quickly, he could take his vehicle, drive around, and that's how he would have gotten captured here on the Hoosier Harvester, parked here, and then come back down. But that is a pretty long distance, even if the goal was to take those girls out of that area in the direction that they were heading. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, we don't know much about what Richard Allen's movements prior to this were. We don't know, did he have some type of interactions with someone else? In my law enforcement career, I found a lot of married men in compromising relationships. And is there possibility that he was triggered by something else that we're totally unaware of, and no one out there that's in the other part of that relationship wants to be? I mean, there's so many possibilities. We don't know where he was at all day, other than what he says and where he was at. Did he have a meeting with someone at the cemetery, or was he actually trolling, like you said, all day looking for a victim? We don't know. Was he checking the other parking lot to see if there was a vehicle at the Mears parking lot when he was coming by, to see if there's potential that if there is a vehicle there that or not? And so there's so many possibilities that we don't know of. And I agree with you, where he chose to park and then go back, that if he was planning an abduction, I do not think it was that he was planning to take him back to his vehicle, because you wouldn't, if you're planning to kidnap victims, you're not going to park 3/4 of a mile away and walk them down a busy trail or a highway. And so that is absolutely something that I have no idea what would have possessed him to park there. I've always thought, and this is my general take on it, and I could be as wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time I've ever been wrong, but my thought is that he parked at that location and that he had a plan that day to abduct someone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he was looking to abduct someone that parked at the Mears parking lot and take them and that victim, or not the victim, but witness, I think witness number 4 is what a lot of people refer to, saw him on the bridge on platform 1. And I think he was following victim number 4 or witness number 4 back to her vehicle. And if he hadn't crossed paths with Libby and Abby, I think that he would have continued and possibly abducted her at her vehicle and forced her to drive somewhere.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we had also thought of as well when we were going through the timeline of events as far as where people had seen the supposed suspect, because there isn't footage. There's pictures of Abby and Libby on the bridge without somebody behind them. So the person that the witness that you're mentioning described that person on that bridge prior to Libby and Abby getting there. So that person had to have left prior to their arrival, or maybe even as they arrived to that scene, he left. He was following the older or the other the witness, decided that the juveniles were more advantageous, turns around and heads back. And when the girls see him coming back, that's what makes them, tick. Hey, that guy was just here and he left. He's coming back. He looks creepy. Maybe he looked at him kind of weird. And that's what started the video. That makes perfect sense.
I'm on Team Turkey with that then.
What's it called? There's also more to that video that they haven't released, or that we know what pertains to it. So I'm kind of curious about what else. I believe there's like 45 more seconds on it. Maybe there's more voices, maybe more footage that we haven't seen, and maybe that would be more solid when it comes down to the trial.
I think I remember when the videos first came out, there was a video of them like walking down the trail, like and seeing the guy behind them coming down the trail too. So I think that might be the part that they're talking about.
Well, that witness 4 said that she met Libby and Abby, or the two girls, about halfway back to her parking lot. And so I went there, and I have made video from the whole trail, and I went back halfway. And from halfway walking towards the bridge, it's less than a minute, and you're seeing the bridge and you're seeing platform 1. So if Richard Allen is there, that through that 1 minute time frame, that Libby and Abby will have seen him either following witness number 4, or will have seen him on platform 1 within a minute. And so when you look at, we only got a minute of lapse time, then it's not likely there's anyone else on that trail other than whoever's on platform 1.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, based on the witness descriptions or witness statements, you had these 3 juveniles that stated that they got there at 1:20, or they saw somebody at 1:30. But there's a photo that has a timestamp of 1:26 p.m. When they were on a bridge or on a bench. And we had looked at a couple of folks that had walked this area, and we kind of timed it, added some, discrepancies for, you have 3 juveniles probably taking pictures of themselves. They're probably walking at a slower pace. They describe Richard Allen walking at a faster pace. So you kind of count for those type of things. But based on how tight that time frame was, if Richard Allen did show up here at 1:30, like he said he did, it is very difficult for it not to have been him on that bridge. The time frame in which it would have happened doesn't make sense. Plus, Richard Allen, his statements are that he went to the bridge, looked at the fish, and then he went back and sat on a bench checking a stock tracker for a while. But yet they've made contact with other witnesses that were on the trail during that time, don't ever remember seeing him there. So I think he's involved. I think that Elvis Fields makes some, concerning statements, but I don't think that doesn't mean that Richard Allen isn't involved.
Yeah, there's people that line up to confess to crimes for whatever reason. It's absolutely nuts.
That's true too. That is 100% true. And that's kind of why, like, for instance, like and this will be a good transition to the Idaho case, that you have a lot of folks that are saying, hey, the original timeline was between 3 and 4. That was the truth. And this 4 to 5 or 4 to 4:30 range is a lie. And I'm like, no, that's in case somebody comes in and confesses and they say, yeah, I did that at 3:45. They know that it's not the guy. It's a false confession. But let's go to the Idaho case.
Sure.
Four University of Idaho students lose their life. 2 University of Idaho students, survivors in the house. No phone call for 8 hours. Brings up a lot of conspiracy and a lot of misinformation that has been out there. But if you were called to that scene, let's walk you through as if you were the CSI on scene. You get called out to a quadruple homicide. At what point of the investigation, first and foremost, do you think that they're contacting forensics to go out there?
Well, there's a lot of things that has to happen. When the first responding officer gets there, of course, you go in and they have to check for signs of life, for the fact that, you're getting to a scene. We have to secure it. We have to make sure also that victims are deceased, or, so there is a potential of cross-contamination and disruption of evidence. But once that's done, scene is secured, and the investigator gets there. Now we're talking about a household that not only has multiple tenants. We have a process that before CSI can process it, we have to go get some search warrants for the fact that other people that either are there at the time, they may be victims, or they may be witnesses, or they may have some type of privacy or the Fourth Amendment that we have to have a search warrant before we start processing. And so you may have 5 or 6 hours before and during that process of obtaining that search warrant before you can go in, that once you determine that there's no sustainability or aid that you can give to the victims before you can start processing the scene, because you do not want fruits from that poison tree by going in there processing, and then someone turns out to be that they're a suspect in the case and you violated their Fourth Amendment.
So I know this comes up a lot. Some folks will say, they had access to the victim's phones, and that the parents of a victim had, the passwords and stuff, that they can give permission to law enforcement, thus they don't need a warrant. Is that accurate?
Well, when you're talking about the victims that, now they, if they're deceased and it's the victim's phone, that is not something that anyone else has privacy rights to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think that, so for instance, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have spoken with Kaylee's mom a couple of times, Kaylee Goncalves, and she has, told us about the phone, and that they never had the phone, that they only had the phone records, that police had that phone. And there was a lot of warrants that went out for, like, for instance, Kaylee's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat. And a lot of questions came about, was like, all right, well, they have permission from the mom who, would probably give permission. There wouldn't be a need to get all these warrants. I think that it's probably more of a cover your tail type of thing to ensure to get all those.
You're talking about institutions and something separate than just what's on their phone that they look at. No,
right.
You're correct that when you go out and you're going to these servers and to where data is kept and maintained by corporations, that yes, there are certain protocols and procedures you need to go out and fulfill. Used to, we could just call up whoever the phone company was and say, hey, can you tell me whose phone number this is? And it changed over the years. And, and that's the thing about the court systems and certain procedures and court precedents are set from case to case. And so now, our abundance of caution, absolutely, get a search warrant if at all possible, for the fact that you don't want to be that landmark case that loses a case due to just doing something that would have taken another 30 minutes.
Yeah, 100%, especially if they're going forensically through, a phone, if they're going through Facebook messages, what kind of rights do the other person on the other side of those messages have, to privacy or whatever the case may be. So I think it's always probably in the best interest of law enforcement to get a warrant, regardless of the situation. So you arrive on scene. You said that there's a lot of stuff that comes up before. One of the biggest questions in this case is that, Sergeant Payne showed up at about 4 or 5 o'clock. It was several hours after 911 was called. And apparently he walked the scene. He saw the knife sheath, but apparently, according to other affidavits, that knife sheath wasn't seen. They had to be told about it. And that's been one of the biggest conspiracies. Now, me personally, I think that once the lead investigator saw the evidence, that it would be collected. At what point is that evidence collected? Is it right after the lead investigator sees it, or is there a certain process before it has to happen?
There's going to be a process that you have to work your way into that scene. You know, we have 4 different victims, so we have 4 independent crime scenes. Each victim is a crime scene in and of themselves. Whatever conflicts and struggle for life, interactions, DNA transfers, fingernail scrapings, all of this, each victim carries this of that during these violent struggles that and those interactions that we have potential that to be able to get it. But now we also have to work our way into how did that offender get into that residence? How did that offender leave that residence? Is there signs of forced entry? And if not, are there signs of how he might have left the residence? And you have to make these choices that if you have a blood trail here, or if you have a certain thought that, okay, he went out the back of the residence versus the front of the residence. If you had to give me a choice of which way a homicide victim or perpetrator is going to leave, whichever way in the middle of the night that has the less light is one I'm going with. And is, you know, so if I had a 50-50 and I didn't have any other weight to consider, then I'm going in through the front door, you know, and process myself in very carefully, looking for hair, fiber, drug transfers, blood drops, and bringing all the tools in that we can. You know, you've got alternate light sources. You've got your own visual eyes. You got flashlights. There's a lot of ways as you work your way in. And then once you get to a certain area, you got to make choices. I've got to process myself to the one that will have the least amount of impact on the other crime scene victims. And so, I mean, it's a long process. There's nothing easy about it.
And before you enter a house or any of those things, there is a person there writing down a log of everybody entering and going. It is
arriving.
Right. Extremely organized. A lot of things are documented to ensure the integrity of the scene. So in a situation like where, for instance, if you were to get to a room like it's been alleged that the second bedroom was blocked by one of the victims. You know, that was told to me by Kaylee Goncalves. She stated that the person that ended up calling 911 got a phone call from one of the victims or the surviving victims or both of the victims. It wasn't verified if it was just one or both, but he ended up getting a call. He shows up. He couldn't get through the door because one of the bodies was blocking. He pushed it enough to kind of look in, saw what he saw, then they called 911. In a situation where you can't get into a crime scene because there's a body being blocking the door, how does that become processed? What is done in those type of situations?
Let's address one other issue before we get to the inside of the house. Now, while the search warrant is being done in any common area that's open to the public outside the residence, you can start processing. You can start looking for evidence. You can look for vehicles. You can look for blood trails. You can bring in canines. You can do whatever you need to out in the public area. But now that you've entered the residence and okay, you go up those steps, you processed yourself that I have a victim here in the doorway. The one that's inside, of course, is also deceased. So we're going to have to process this one at the door first. Everything has to be handled here because we don't want to transfer through footprints and introduce evidence into that until we get this processed here. And then we'll get in there to the other victim. Now, when he opened that door and looked in there, if he saw a sign of life, then of course we have to just, absolutely just step over the first victim and we go into whatever will save and preserve life. And, but that choice didn't arise. And so, but yes, we processed one in the door would be my manner of processing the scene. I don't know what manner they did.
Gotcha. And, I assume, when it came to the probable cause affidavit, that was one of the things that it didn't mention about, or there was some question marks about Ethan's body, its location in the room. It specified that there had to be an autopsy done later to identify his injuries. Is that because his injuries were so severe it couldn't have been determined at that time and they needed an autopsy? Or is that because if his body was the one blocking the door and it had to be moved, that it had to have a different process?
Well, and this is what I was meaning when I said that I was surprised at the lack of blood evidence at the Delphi case.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is what the other side of the pole is. This is what I would expect under an edge weapon, that when you have such an incident that occurs and you have a struggle for life and you have a victim that's in this battle and struggle, they're going to have a lot of defensive injuries. There's going to be a lot of heavy staining, blood flows, and you're not going to be able to identify all those injuries. And so you're going to have a tremendous amount, and there's nothing clean about a knife attack. It's extremely messy, and it's absolutely things that nightmares are made of.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so, and one quick question, just leaving the scene real quick. In your experience, somebody with a K-bar knife, do you think that they had ample amount of time to commit the crime solo, one person, 9 to 11 minutes, go in there and dispatch four young, beautiful people?
Yes, I think so. If we watched another trial, O.J. Simpson, that he encountered two individuals, one of them highly trained that was into martial arts. If he is the offender, whoever the offender was able to do it in a public section near a sidewalk and it not be discovered for some time. And so that's two individuals. But for this offender, 8 to 9 minutes, yes, because, it would be tight. He would, I fought 3 individuals one time. There was 4 of us in a fight. There was 3 on 1, and we fought for 12 minutes. And we were 4 pretty bloodied individuals at the end of that. But can you fight that long? Yes, it's possible. Now, I was in my 20s then. You fight me now, I've got about 30 seconds, and that's it. But back in those days, and you look at an individual that trains, that's an athlete, yes, he may be able to, and that may be what allowed the other victims to survive. That he was spent, because 9 minutes is a long time, guys.
No, yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. What do you got, Jaime?
I was gonna say, wasn't in China the subway attacks? Weren't they knife attacks? Didn't the guy stab 26 people or something like that at one point in 5-10 minutes?
Yeah. The knife is a very quick weapon. Yeah. A lot of folks don't think how fast it could be because they assume a gun is the fastest way to go in there and commit a crime like this. Which
I'd rather face a gun than a knife, guys.
You rather what?
I'd rather face a gun than a knife.
Yeah. I mean, you got a person that's behind that trigger has to know how to use it too.
Yeah. When it comes down to the knife sheath, if it wasn't for the knife sheath, do you think they would find out what kind of knife it was to begin with?
There's a good, because there's a lot of telltale signs that whenever you use some type of edge weapon, you can tell length of the blade from certain injuries, the width, thickness, if it has any type of like the back cut blade for, I don't know what type of K-bar this was, but if it has certain characteristics, plus if he had contact with any of the bedding material or the clothing, that you can get an outline of that knife almost, I've seen it where it looks like you draw the picture of it, it's of the blade itself or of the, and you may have after those first injuries that the guard on the knife, that if it comes in contact with clothing, you'll be able to see the outline of that guard, either on skin or on clothing once it's processed. So there's a lot of telltale signs from edged weapons that can identify characteristics of that knife, from the guard to handles to even the outline of the blade.
When speaking of the guard on the knife, if the suspect is putting so much force behind the stabbing itself, wouldn't that guard leave a bruise on his hand?
Very possible. If he hits bone or something, or if he misses and he hits a headboard or he hits something, absolutely. And they can break. Knives break. I've seen them break.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can you, if there was some metal fragments in one of the victim's bodies, is there a way to tell from the metal composition of where it was made and try to find a manufacturer for it that way?
I would expect so, because like I said, the labs and what they can do with some of the equipment and technologies out there now, that they could pretty well, tell a lot of different things. Did it come from what class of iron, ore, or wherever? It's you see that stuff, and it's in the movies. And if it's in the movies, there's some basis of truth behind it, guys. There really is.
100%. What about if you can you tell on a stabbing victim if the offender was left or right-handed?
Sometimes it depends. Now, if you can place the victim and then you can place the offender, and you may have, because there's a lot of things that happen in the blood pattern analysis that through a struggle, you're going to have motions of hands, and you're going to have what is called cast off, not only from the weapon, but from the hand. You'll have cast off from the victims also that are fighting defensive injuries. And if you can place that offender in a face-to-face confrontation, and then you see what side of the body that the victim's injuries are on, then of course, yes, it's easy to identify. And you may also be able to see that, if all the cast off, if you have two individuals faced off and all the cast off is to the right of one offender and to the left of the other, then that means that and you can place where the victim is due to that they're laying there, then we know that all the cast off came from and to the right, then he's right-handed. See what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah. Can you tell if there's a if, like, for instance, in this case, we have 4 victims, right, in 2 different rooms. If 2 offenders went into that room with 2 similar knives, would you be able to tell that the same offender, just based on their wounds, if it was the same offender, if there was 2 offenders?
There's sometimes you may even have the shadowing effect, whereas if there are more than one offender, and you see a lot of it with high velocity blood spatter, when you may have someone that shoots someone, and the back spatter will create a shadow that there's an absence of blood behind them. And so you could have the same thing, that if you have a fight going over here and you have a blood cast off pattern, and then all of a sudden there's a void, and then it starts up again, and you have this repeated, that there may have been someone standing over there. And if it's not another victim, it could be another offender. And so we don't know, but of what's in that crime scene, but there's so much to tell. And blood pattern analysis is absolutely fascinating. And it can tell you so much, the story of what went on in those rooms.
Just looking at so you said that you would arrive first and you would look at the outside of the building. Outside of the back of the what was suspected to be Xana's bedroom was what looked like blood coming down onto the foundation. Just kind of seeing that from the outside without looking inside, what would that tell you about that scene, seeing the blood coming out like that?
Well, of course, first question, is that blood? And if so, who's on the other side of that wall? And if that was, and I've seen those pictures, and that's a tremendous amount. The floor seal evidently wasn't sealed very well for it to pass under, because most flooring in houses, you normally wouldn't have that. You wouldn't expect that. But I was surprised to see it.
I was too.
It usually has like a flashing between the wall itself and the concrete itself. So it's weird to see it actually seep out. And if it did, there was a lot of blood coming up through there.
Oh yes.
So by seeing that, does that say to you that there's a body in close proximity, or can there be a body a little bit further away in it?
No, I would think that yes, this is where one of them was within just a foot or two.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. Kind of looking at that scene, I was like, I don't think that person was.
And they sustained an injury at a low point because for the fact that for that amount of blood, you almost have to totally take a lot of blood out of that victim. And it has to be injuries that will allow that blood flow. It's not like if you're laying on your back and you get a high point center chest, there's going to be very little blood flow. Everything's just going to, once the heart stops, everything's just going to settle. But if you have injuries to lower or back or to the chest face down, that allows all that blood to pool outside the body, that's where you get all this massive blood flow.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So apparently, looking at the probable cause affidavit, and they're using the DNA on the sheath as evidence against Kohberger. What that tells me is that there isn't any other DNA evidence underneath the fingernails or anywhere else, because I would assume that DNA would have been used to arrest Bryan Kohberger. So just kind of, looking at it from that angle, then it appears that they don't have that. Are you surprised by the fact that there's a lack of DNA evidence from a perp?
Locard's principle of exchange, absolutely. Once again, just like with the Delphi, I expect it's there. It's just not been discovered for the fact that you have 4 violent encounters. You have a man that possibly may have injured himself, and you would have that DNA mixture if he had cut himself, because that's quite often that does occur, that, during the struggle, you may throw a hand up and they may deflect your arm and you may cut yourself. Obviously that didn't happen, or we don't know of it. It may have happened, but they haven't released that information yet. It is just so that I would expect that there was, and the lack of DNA shows that there is a tremendous amount of planning to make sure that we don't have that transfer.
Yeah, from what I was told, that this person was very intelligent, that the law enforcement officers were aware of how intelligent he was. From details that I have uncovered, basically it is suspected that the perpetrator opened the back sliding glass door and never touched it again in efforts to not leave DNA behind. I thought that when you look at where the position of Dylan's bedroom, it is right across from the kitchen and right next to the stairs that are going up. If Bryan Kohberger isn't familiar with that area, even if he's, visually seeing that, stalking and looking, that door isn't visible from, unless you go into the backyard and stand in front of that glass door, it's kind of hard to see that door where Dylan's bedroom is. If the intent was to not touch anything as little as possible, if he saw that door and he thought it was a closet door, I can see why he wouldn't try to open it. If he's not, if he thinks it's a closet, he's going to move up to the top and then move around. He hears something. My theory is that he comes in. My theory is that he's driving around and that Xana ordered a DoorDash, and that given the fact that the location of her house is kind of tricky to find, she probably left some sort of indicator on, maybe a light outside, a light inside, to inform the DoorDasher this is where the location is at. And we see that after 4 o'clock is when Bryan Kohberger starts to, at least his driving starts to be a little bit erratic. If the allegedly Bryan Kohberger, we know at 4 o'clock is when Xana supposedly receives the DoorDash. At 4:05 is when the white Elantra stops, does this weird turn at Queen apartment 502, then attempts to either stop or do a turnaround in front of the victim's residence. Doesn't successfully do that. Goes further, does a 3-point turn at the King and Queen Road residence, and then comes back all the way around. And when he comes back around, if the audio of that Linda Lane footage is accurate, it sounds like he hits the horn at 4:07, which tells me he's probably grabbing a bag from his passenger seat, getting prepared to go in, and he hit the horn on accident. But you can tell at that moment things got real for this guy, and he was making tremendous amount of mistakes. I think he walked in, he went upstairs, he left the back sliding glass door. I think Xana may have felt the draft coming in, walked out there, said, I think somebody's here, sees the door, turns around, walks back to where her boyfriend is, sleeping already, or still sleeping. And before she can alert him, she is surprised from behind. And then there's a struggle there with Ethan. And that's kind of my thoughts as far as where everything is at and how it looks. And from my understanding as well, both scenes were pretty much contained to the bedrooms, meaning there wasn't a lot of blood going back and forth between the scenes. For somebody to go in there and commit a crime like this and not get blood on their feet, I would assume, are you surprised that there isn't some sort of evidence between the rooms?
Well, it depends on where the injuries were. If he's on the bed and he's kneeling or laying on the bed, he's jumped on them and he's on his knees, and the fight is on those first two upstairs. I don't know. Yeah. And it's one thing when you're fighting standing up and you have a mobile victim. It's a different thing when you are fighting a victim that's on their back, and you may be attacked by another victim from the side flanking that's on that bed. You're on your knees. So anything that happened, and I'm just speculating, that if he went in and surprised the two victims in the bed upstairs first, and that confrontation never got to the floor, then I wouldn't expect that there would be a lot. We do know that there was blood prints in front of Dylan's door. And this is where there are victims that are upright. Yeah. And mobile. And now we have transfers. We have shoe patterns that law enforcement says that where she said he was at, we have shoe prints. And so now that's supporting evidence of that someone in that room, that there was an encounter that he encountered, say, whoever the victim in the door was, that they're bleeding. He had to step over and go find the other one. And now we have to come back through that victim that's at the door. See what I'm saying? Yeah.
Makes sense. But it's just one print, and it's over here in this area by where Dylan's bedroom is. The killer would have had to have walked down this hall and through this living area and just to leave this one spot.
Now there's one they got. There may be others. They just may not be cleared, or they were contaminated, or there's a lot of things that could have happened to those prints. And whatever the material was that he was during the transfer, because you can have oversaturation from a print, but eventually you're going to have one that is at almost a pristine transfer, that you start off extremely messy and you can't tell anything other than it's a blob. But as you get less and less, there's going to be one that stands out that says, this is our best one. And is that the spot? I don't know.
So the probable cause affidavit states that the footprint was found at the second go through while utilizing amino black. What does that mean?
It's just another one of the tests that you test and blood pattern analysis of applying chemicals that interact with blood. Oh, I have it at the lab. I have some amino black myself, but it's just the same with luminol. That not the same. It's a different chemical that has a reaction that you don't need alternate light sources to see the reaction, and it's just a different processing agent. And but anyone that wants to look at these things, you can go to. I order all my chemicals from Searchy, and so you go on there and you see all these presumptive blood tests, and you can see certain chemicals used to enhance alternate light sources. there's so much things that can bring where things can be collected and seen due to chemical reactions of processing the scene. And each CSI guy has to make the choice, what's going to give me the best results on this particular print. And so they chose Amido Black.
So they would have to visually be able to see it, right? They're not just putting amino black on the floor and seeing if anything pops.
Yeah, they would have had something that said, oh, there's something here.
Okay. Yeah, because that was one of the biggest concerns, was that print wasn't visible, that they had to utilize some sort of technology to bring it up. And, it sounds like it was visible, and it would have had to have been visible for them to apply it to the area. It is suspected that the perpetrator may have worn some Dickies work pant coveralls. Are you familiar with that type of material? And if so, like how protective could that be for, for one, for the perpetrator not to leave DNA behind, and also for him not to get DNA from the victims?
Well, I did some testing on that of removal of clothing to try to determine how quick that if you committed and you had to transfer. Once again, Mrs. Steve and I, we went out and we interacted and threw synthetic blood on each other, trying to replicate and how protective each layer would be. And we used Tyvek painter suits, but the Dickies outerwear would probably, be something along those lines. And it could, do I think it was 100% effective? Probably not. But the more layers he put on, the more likely he would have minimized that by the time he got to his vehicle. If he took that outer layer off, took off a layer of gloves, so that he wouldn't have any type of transfer. And then if he had a different pair of shoes, but that takes planning, and that takes a highly intelligent, motivated, mission-oriented individual that has a plan that I'm going to commit whatever homicide I'm going to commit, and
right.
how I'm going to get away with it. And I mean, you're talking about an animal that this monster of pre-planning, stalking, carrying out is, like I said, this is something made for the movies.
Right. So if it wasn't Bryan Kohberger, and who would you suspect? What kind of person would you have suspected this to have committed this crime? I mean, obviously, I personally don't think some drunk college kid could have gone in there, committed this crime, and not leave DNA behind. I don't think an ex-boyfriend, in a crime of passion, would have committed a crime without leaving DNA behind. It seems like it's somebody very skilled, somebody who's maybe done this before. What are your thoughts?
Well, we look at the residents. We know it's not someone hitchhiking through on the interstate system that's at the edge of town that is hunting food, a vehicle, some type of enrichment of his life just to get to the next town, or some type of serial offender that's doing it for whatever fantasy fed. We're looking at a resident that was chosen that's in the middle of, surrounded by all different types of housing. And so I would be looking for someone that absolutely they were targeted. Someone in this house was targeted. Now I've got to determine which one of them was targeted and why. And I believe that will be the case.
Do when when processing in a crime scene, when it comes down to the doors and the doorknobs, would they be removed and then put as evidence, or would they just be swabbed?
I would prefer that if I see something or if I process it, and anytime you process, say that you're processing a doorknob and you're putting powder. In this case, if you've had blood stains and things, absolutely, we're going to try to take that doorknob. If it's something that doesn't appear to have any blood stain and we processed it with whatever type of chemicals to see that, no, we don't have this. And we have to make decisions. Do we use powder? Do we use a chemical? Because once again, you have to weigh what am I processing and what evidence is supporting that he touched this doorknob. And did he touch it on the way in? If the door, because going up, and we don't know the victimology of the girls on the top floor. Did everyone in that residence normally keep their doors closed? If so, that you may be able to, that before any introduction of blood to the crime, he had to open that door. And so to open that door, you may on the outside of that door handle, oh yeah, I'm just going to process this with powder. But then we have to look at that when he was leaving that bloody crime scene, did he pull the door shut behind him? And then if we did that, now we've got to determine what we're going to do with this. And that has a lot to do with that first responding officer. How did you find this door? Was it open? Was it closed? And there's so much stuff to, to determine, evaluate, and decisions to be made.
Makes sense. When it comes back to the sheath, though, there was DNA found inside of the button. According to the defense, that sheath was face down underneath the body, and I was partially underneath the body and underneath the comforter. I'm assuming that there was probably a lot of blood in that area, given the nature of the crime. Is it possible that that sheath had more DNA? And if it was like transfer DNA and it got covered in blood, would that overcome it, or would you be able to pull that out?
Well, regarding the sheath, I think the sheath is there due to the fact that he is wearing layers. He's wearing something like at Dickies, that he doesn't have a belt to put that knife in, and he has it in hand. And during that process, and if he has it in hand, then we have to deduce that he had some type of gloves on, because you would have more DNA from a naked hand that's holding a sheath during an encounter, or even during the transport, that we don't have all this DNA transfer, touch DNA on this sheath. So how is that possible? And then it's only limited to inside those buttons. And so, looking in hindsight and thinking about what would protect that sheath from DNA, what would allow that sheath not to be on his person, such as in a belt, because how many times do we see people walking the street with a knife that's sheathed and it's on their belt? You don't see people walking around the street with knives in their hands carrying the sheath. And the only reason that you would, and if not to leave DNA, you have to have some type of protective gloves on. And why did he fail? And did he absolutely clean that sheath? And what did he clean it with that wouldn't have DNA on it? Because if it's something from his home environment, it had to be cleaned at some point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they got a video of him buying a bunch of supplies in different places. So he may have, bought these supplies and, never touched them. I mean, I don't know, until it was time to clean these items and, or, get down to the planning aspect of it. I believe that he had purchased the coveralls, according to what we have seen, like within a couple of, or what's been disclosed. And I don't know how true it is or how not true it is. It's been in the, I think it was maybe it was Dateline that said it, that in the days leading up to the murders is when they have a receipt for a Dickies tag that he purchased those Dickies clothing. I think that would make sense, because if he had it in his home, there would be an opportunity for DNA to get all over it, thus transfer it back. I mean, you have a question?
Well, I was going to say, when it comes down to the Dickies, I said earlier that they're stain resistant, right? And they're also they're a little bit harder to puncture, I believe, than regular material, right?
Yeah, so, yes, they're more of a quarter. Some of them are. I don't know which ones he bought. I think that there may be different materials they use. Like I said, I don't know what brand. I know what brand, but I just don't know of which of the type of material.
Yeah, I own Dickies. I used to wear a lot of Dickies, actually, but I remember they would last forever. I mean, they would last forever. They would puncture, but it wouldn't. How other material you puncture and it'll run after a while real fast. These were punctured, they'll stay there for a while and they wouldn't run.
Yeah, it's very high durable stuff. When it comes to the car, though, so the biggest concern or the biggest question that a lot of folks have is that there was no DNA from the victims inside his Elantra, and we can probably assume that that thing was taken piece by piece apart. How surprised were you when that information came out?
I'm still surprised. I look at this and I'm absolutely surprised. And once again, you have to say that this is not a crime that if he is the offender and that is his vehicle and he went from a crime scene and was able to leave within that time frame, his abilities and his structures and his thought processes to do that means that we prepped a vehicle, the interior of, and then we prepped ourselves to be able to either change out our first layer, get in a vehicle that has protective measures, go to a safe area, clean our vehicle, transfer everything back out, and then within a few hours go back to our residence with no DNA in the vehicle, and rely upon repeated cleaning of that. Did I miss something? Did I miss something?
Yeah. I was surprised as well. It was something that I thought was going to be, there was going to be something there. I didn't think there was any absolute way that he wasn't going to be able to overcome that. But then, I went back and I started to read the probable cause affidavit again, and it mentions his long trip around after the murders that gets him to Pullman around 5:36. And I was wondering myself, why take that route? Even if you're going to go hide something and put it out there somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you're still taking a very long route. And then I realized, well, he turned his phone off during the commission of the crime. He turned it off in Pullman. He turned it on outside of the radius in which he may have known that law enforcement were going to look at, and or maybe perhaps he pulled up, the towers for that area. And when he got out of a certain distance, he turned his phone on. Regardless, it worked, because honestly, if it wasn't for the knife sheath, based on what the fact that they had to use an IgG to get him, tells me that they had no idea it was him at that point. And so his actions work. But my thought is, he takes this long trip because law enforcement is going to say, all right, we have a white vehicle without a front license plate driving around suspiciously between 4 o'clock and 4:20. If this vehicle left town and it headed towards Blaine, Idaho, it would have been there within a certain amount of time. If it left to Genesee, if it left to Pullman, it would be there within a certain amount of time. And that law enforcement officers would be surveilling, cameras for that specific time to see if a vehicle's coming in. So he took a long trip that would take longer than it would be assumed that law enforcement would search those cameras. And if he went to that extent, just so that he doesn't get caught on cameras pulling into Pullman, I mean, he must have gone to a great extent everywhere else.
I agree.
So I just think that this guy is, I think, and that's what the motive is. My opinion is, I think the house is the motive. When you look at what was going on in Kohberger's life at the time, he had lost the majority of his jobs. He had lost his security job while he was at DeSales. There was a resignation letter that was produced, and on the resignation letter, it stated that he was aware that he understood, had he not resigned, that termination could be an end result of his employment there, meaning that if he didn't quit, they were going to fire him. So he had different situations throughout his life. I think in high school, he got kicked out of a law enforcement class. And although there's not much to say where or why, but he was put in a classroom without females. And then you have the only place where he seemed to have thrived was DeSales University. However, he was there during the pandemic, and a bunch of those courses were online. So he wasn't there personally. And then he gets this, recommendation for the PhD program. So, he's thinking he's the big fish. He goes out to a rural area. We find out that there is an email in April from Pullman Chief Jenkins, a correspondence between him and Bryan Kohberger referencing an interview they had for his possible position as an intern police officer within their department. And we know that he applied in the fall. So if he didn't, if he applied in the spring and had to apply in the fall, that kind of tells me he didn't get it, probably because of his background that he had. And then he goes to WSU, apparently has a bunch of problems with female students there, has problems with a certain professor, ends up getting in altercations and gets kicked out. I think that, I forgot to mention, if, what Dateline and NBC are saying are accurate, that they have a receipt for a K-bar knife in April, the same month that I'm assuming he's probably getting turned down for the intern, job as a police officer. So all these things are going negative in his life. The school is turning him away. The police department's turning him away. So he wants to have some sort of revenge in the area, so to speak. But he's smart enough to know that if he commits this crime against any of the people that he really probably wants to commit this crime towards, that it would come back to him. So he chooses somewhere else. He had supposedly this one guy that was friends with him came out and started talking. They had text messages where Bryan Kohberger stated that he wanted to be involved in a high profile case, stated that he wanted to be the detective to solve it, but that it was going to be very difficult for him to be in those positions. So I'm thinking he really did want to get involved in a high profile case. And, there's 3 roles: the police officer, the victim, or the perpetrator. I don't think he wanted to be the other 2. So, he goes out there, he finds the house with the biggest party, that'll attract national attention, and then he follows him. I think he chooses that house because of the traffic that's in and out of there. He had access to probably some police information, may have known that there was going to be a force out there that was trying to deter underage drinking. We know that because there's the Banfield, police officers that had stopped out with those guys in the Banfield. And I think that was going to be a deterioration of drinking, which was going to stop the parties as well. So he would have known that possibly. So, I think it all lines up, in my opinion. And I think that maybe perhaps the house indeed was the target to create a bigger crime. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, he wanted, and is his whole purpose to create fear in the community. What was his driving motivation for this crime? Was it specifically one victim, or is there more to it, that he wanted to be a serial offender, that sort of like what BTK did to Wichita?
Yeah.
That you start off and you do this, and was that part of his purpose? We don't really know yet, but there is that possibility. And he's a failure. But the scary part is that there's others out there that are just as evil as he is, that are successful at this and have victims out there that we may or may not even know about.
Yeah. In your opinion, do you think this is the first offense for this person?
I think he has other crimes. Are there other homicides? I don't know, but he would have other crimes that are supporting of his mental. There's certain crimes as far as that. He likes to take late night drives. Who are the other victims? What areas did he visit? Where did he take these late night drives? Is he one of these individuals that parks his vehicle and goes through neighborhoods, peeping Tom type of offender? Is he stalking other victims on these late night drives of these and looking for potential victims that are walking down streets, hitchhikers, some of the human trafficking victims, things of that nature? Because I love working the night shift from that morning watch from midnight to early mornings, because there's a certain type of individuals out there. And they're some of them are extremely hardworking people, and that's the job that they work and the shift that they work. But there are some very odd individuals that frequent that night, because they'll go in these neighborhoods, and they are these peeping Tom stalker type of individuals. They'll go into a house and break into a residence and stand at the foot of the bed until the victim wakes up. I mean, what kind of nut does that take?
Yeah, 100%. There are definitely some crazies that are out there. I myself have seen some crazy stuff as well. In my profession or in my past. What do you got?
Well, I was gonna say, you said, Steve, that the crime itself, it looked like it was planned really, really, really good, and you see that. For me, I see if there was planned, months or whatever time it took, there will be more evidence, right, of him making the plans, especially in those 51 terabytes that they have, right, on his computer. You think the possibility of there being plans on there is real good.
I think they have of his digital footprint and of the computers and what other devices does he have? What's in his purchase history? Does he know that they're going to be doing certain things? And does he deliberately stay away from it? Because we're talking about a guy that if I was in the room with him, he's absolutely far more intelligent than I. I mean, he's going getting the highest level of education that only a small percentage of people can achieve, and so and he knows what law enforcement is going to be looking for, and he's prepping for that. And so, would he create a digital trail, or would he do a lot of it of old school, of pen and paper and just drawing it out? I think with the Golden State offender, that when he did a lot of artwork and drawings,
Mm-hmm.
but that was pre-computer, and he just did it out of necessity. But
Yeah.
would Kohberger realize that, yes, this is how they're going to track me, is that if I do anything digitally, so therefore I have to stay away from it. But still, he underestimated law enforcement's, and it's brilliant how they came to this and started the camera canvas and acquiring all that digital, something that will play huge roles in the future as we get more and more cameras out there, rings and things that they will play an important part, and they'll be able to use this case, Idaho, in so many ways about how to go out there and acquire those camera and create that roadmap of who's on the road, when, what intersection do they, I think they did the same thing in the Boston bombers, that they used those cameras from corner to corner and was able to track those
Yeah.
brothers.
Yeah. When in this case, does it amaze you the fact that the roommates didn't hear the commotion happening in the rooms?
Well, you know, what was the normal, and that's the thing, we don't know what the normal activity of a college campus uh, and the normal things that occurred in its house. Um, I don't know what the level of activity was and what time, you know, if you're getting home at, at the times they got and you're still ordering food at 4 o'clock, that this isn't the first time that's ever occurred. And so we have activities of what went on. Um, Now I'm speculating on that, but
Mm-hmm.
I would expect that or not that, normal sleep patterns are, everyone has them. And when you're in college or otherwise, that you're in this type of environment, what was their normal weekend patterns? And if it's within that uh, parameters, uh, what, you know, uh, the one witness says, I thought they were upstairs playing with the dog.
Yeah.
And then they hear these other voices. And, there's a lot of, you know, oddities about why certain things weren't discovered. But, I'm not going to be blaming other survivors for
Yeah.
whatever happened,
Yeah. No. Totally.
They're very lucky that they survived.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, Danny, you're on.
My bad. So a couple of questions. A lot of a lot of the conspiracies out there is that there's some sort of drugs related and things of that nature. Now, I know that based on the probable cause affidavit and a lot of the court documents, that all of the phones were digitally downloaded. Wouldn't there be some sort of evidence of that communication for, some sort of drug stuff? And I mean, I just feel like there would have been some sort of evidence on that phone, and that would have been crossed out pretty quickly. Is that accurate?
Not only that, but you'd have the camera activities. They were able to track him. You're the worst drug dealer in the world if all you've got coming to your house is someone delivering food.
That's true. That is true. I didn't think about that. Yeah, the only person that's coming up to the house is delivering food. That is very true. Is there a way a person can erase everything off of their phone that can't be found within a specific amount of time?
I don't believe so. I mean, I can barely, when you go on a computer, you find out that, yes, you can go in there and delete, but no, people that know how can find what's out there, because now we have the cloud base and you have all this other stuff. And so I absolutely, when it comes to all this Google stuff and these computers and these devices, every time I get accustomed to using a device, Mrs. Steve goes and buys me a new one, and I'm as lost as last year's Easter egg of trying to figure it out the next week. So trying to delete all the information, I don't think is possible, because there's so many apps out there that store your information, that you're in constant contact, that you have an app on your phone and you don't know that it's sending out information or what information it's sending or tracking and how you're linked up with everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What's it called? I was going to ask you, Steve, knowing, there's a lot of talk that the house itself was a party house. How much harder does it make it for, CSI to assess the whole crime scene?
Well, it's extremely difficult because you got so much DNA there. But the DNA that we have to identify with is what is within the crime scene itself. Some of the common areas, like at the kitchen sink or in the bathroom downstairs, in the sink and stuff, you may be able to say that, anyone's DNA there is, easily there's excuses of why it could be there. Mm-hmm. But on the sheath under the victim is not something of a party goer.
Yeah.
Or if you have a hair or a fiber or any type of cross contamination from the scene to the victim or suspect, that those are the things that we have to look for. The most recent outer layer type of evidence.
When it comes to a crime scene and you have, all right, so in the defense in the Bryan Kohberger case are claiming that there are 2 unknown DNA samples that are somewhere in the area near where the 2 of the bodies were located. And they were, I guess, asking the question if those things were processed and or if there was any workup on those. Now, I know that there's some rules with the IGG as far as, FBI involvement and how they can get involved. But is there like a specific maybe pecking order as far as how DNA is processed, as far as importance? Like if you find the DNA on a sheath, and then you find DNA on a shelf, 20 feet away in the same room but in the opposite corner, do you process or try to test that DNA first before moving on to maybe some DNA that is a little bit further out?
And that's something else about that. The way that they can analyze and the quickness of the return of the results is absolutely amazing, because there was a kidnapping, I think, happened in Tennessee, and off a flip-flop, they were able to identify the offender within 48 hours or something. That happened last year. So, but yes, the pecking order of how DNA is that the more likely it's involved, that, okay, you get there and you have a knife sheath under the victim, and then you have a knife sheath in a back closet on a top shelf. which one do we process first? The closer it's to the scene, the more likely it has involvement with is the pecking order all the way out. And if you have other bloodstain items, those things with DNA would be tested or attempted to be tested to lift DNA with things that can be linked to the activities of that occurred that night.
Good deal. Yeah, that was one of the questions that I had, and I was trying to, I read the DOJ policy, and apparently if there's some sort of lead or if there's any kind of lead that they can't get involved, basically. And it makes sense. I mean, if you have a lead on somebody, why go run their family tree? Just take their DNA from the trash and try to see if it matches. You know what I mean?
Oh, you talking about that? I thought you was talking about what type of evidence to be processed first. But yes, also for the and I was surprised that that there is an issue about that DNA, and the courts will have to probably settle that of how they're going to approach some of the processes that was used by the FBI and these other agencies in determining that DNA. Like I said, that's something that we never faced years ago, but now there's all this DNA. What is it? 23andMe and all this other stuff. All these they have certain protocols of. Can you even use it to identify in criminal activities? So we just have to see where it's going to go.
Gotcha. Yeah, for me, I don't understand the argument, to be honest with you. From the defense's side, that IgG report or workup isn't used as evidence against Kohberger. So what they're trying to do is enter evidence that's not being used so they can throw it out. I mean, it's not going to have an effect on the other DNA that's out there, or the DNA on the sheath, or the warrant that was obtained to match Kohberger's DNA to it. So I just kind of seem to think that it's a
I see it as nothing burger. I don't understand it.
Yeah, me either. And I know that there's a lot of folks that are like, oh, you would want to know, all the evidence against you. And I was like, I understand that, I get that, but there are certain things that happen during an investigation. Somebody says that they don't want to testify, they don't want to, talk, they just kind of point you in a direction. Well, you still got to build your case. And if you go and, build the case the appropriate way, you don't ever have to use that information. And so that's kind of where I'm at on that. We're going to be asking some questions real quick before we head on out of here. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. Why would a person take his own car registered to himself to a crime scene? On top of that, get caught on cameras. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he underestimated the amount of cameras and their ability to identify that vehicle. People make mistakes. Criminals try to, it happens every day that they think they're smart, and they are in certain cases, but there's no such thing as a perfect crime. And if you take a tag off another vehicle and place it on your vehicle, what tag rigger is going to catch you? And and then you get stopped for that, and you're dressed up as a serial offender 101. You're wearing gloves and mask, and your car is decked out with protective materials that, there's certain risks. But I understand your point. But he was able to escape with his registered car for 60 days?
Yeah. For me on this question, and then I'll go to you, Jaime. I don't understand, honestly, the taking somebody else's car avenue is a smarter way of getting away with a crime. First and foremost, we got to figure out, where is he getting this car? Is he stealing it? Now he has to get, out of two crimes, the murder and the theft of the vehicle. Is he renting it? Well, there's going to be some sort of documentation that the vehicle was rented. And, I'm pretty sure law enforcement are going to go and check to see if there's any vehicles that were rented or sold or test driven, around the time of the incident. And, or does he go and borrow it? Now, he's new to the area. He has very little friends, and probably the friends or the people that he does communicate with are other students that are following criminal justice. So I doubt he's going to find somebody in that realm that is going to be like, hey, you can use my car. And even if he did use somebody else's car, you know, I think that that person, if they didn't have knowledge about it, would have been like, hey, you know, I let Bryan use my car. I let somebody use my car this night and this horrific thing happened. I'm you know, if it's a college student that's trying to be in criminal justice that understands reporting things, they're probably going to go forward to the police department and say, hey, I lent this person my vehicle. So I really don't understand that avenue of using somebody else's car to get away with a crime. It's never made sense to me. What are your thoughts, Hyman?
Oh, I don't either. I think that he used his own personal vehicle, and he was. Now, do they have images that they discovered since then of his tag? You know, I don't know, but
Yeah.
and it is strange to me that they weren't able to get out of all the camera work. They weren't able to get one tag, and of all the service stations, banks, because you know they probably pulled every thing they could ever pull at every intersection in business.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Plus, all the tag readers are out there now, toll roads and things.
Mm-hmm. Simon, you had a question?
Well, I was going to answer the question itself. I think it was like you said. It's easy access for him. It's the easiest thing to do. Unfortunately, that car itself, or the suspected car, right, did get caught on some of the cameras, and it's nowadays there's cameras everywhere. Everywhere. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a reason they called it the golden age of serial killers back in the 70s, because the technology wasn't what it is now. Now it's a lot harder, to do crimes. But I think the easiest answer is it was just easier access for him to use his own car.
Now there was a you're right, but there was an image also there of the 1112 King Road residence, the next door neighbor from their ring camera that was taken and put out there. And there are some cars that are fairly close to that camera. You can't read the tag. The Linda Lane footage as well. There's cars parked underneath that awning or in that carport area that's very close to the cameras. And because it's night, you can't read the tag. I think that may have been something that was strategic when you look at where Kohberger's vehicle was spotted, where the white Elantra was spotted. Majority of it, from what I understand, I mean, we don't have it all, obviously, but for what I understand is it was a lot of residential areas, which would have had the same technology and cameras that we've been seeing. So it could have been very much so, planned that way. Lona says, how many times in trials I've seen evidence sealed in a paper bags after processing. Do these items degrade in the bags for future analysis if needed? And I want to add on to that. Law enforcement and prosecutors have talked about destroying this house because of possible chemicals and things of that nature and don't want people going in. How is that accurate as well? That can happen?
Let me answer the evidence seal bag first. Paper is a great, it allows the moisture to evaporate from that if you have any type of moisture in the blood or other agents, because moisture allows bacteria and a mold to develop, and that will destroy DNA. So paper is the perfect thing to prolong DNA. So it doesn't degrade. Once it's dried, it's there. And so everything has to be air dried, and paper allows that. Now, as far as the chemicals in that house, through all these chemicals that CSI, and Lord knows how much I've been exposed to, and I'll probably pay for it one of these days, because we started way back when we didn't fully understand all the chemicals that we used and we breathed, and in these closed environments. They're better prepared now, and they have the Tyvek, and they have the personal items that they can put on that will protect them from some of this hazardous breathing in respirators that it's changed over the years. And for them to say that they're going to have to destroy that house to protect people means that they used every avenue and every resource and every chemical that you can imagine to process that scene. So they have a library of evidence from in there, because they you have to use a lot of luminol, you have to use a lot of metal black and all the other chemicals. And I don't know what all they used in there, but from that storyline, it tells me that the house is a health hazard.
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way. And now that you explain it in that manner, that does make sense. Angel D says, does Steve think that there must be a blood trail inside 1122 when forensics were so obviously photographing items on the floor beneath the good vibes orange canvas in the living room of 1122?
There's a lot of different types of blood trails that you'll have in that house. You'll have a blood trail from one victim to the other of transfer stains, that who was the first victim that received the first blow, and then whatever those injuries when we went to the second victim. Because then you'll have the second victim that have a combination of first victim and their blood. Then you'll go to the third and to the fourth. And so you'll have that type of blood trail. Then you'll also possibly have, whereas if you're clothing your weapon and you have blood stains on your arms, your shoulders, your knees, your shoes, that you'll have transfer stains as you come in contact with walls, doors, floors. And so you can have a blood trail that way. You can have a blood trail if you injured yourself, and the blood droplets as you move through the scene. So there's a lot of different blood trails that would be within a residence.
Gotcha. So I'll go to the next one. What do you think is the reasoning on why he would go back to the scene hours later?
Same thing for these arsonists, man. You know, they'll go back. They won't see it. They won't see what they won't see are the people in fear. What's going on? Is law enforcement's doing? Are they amazed at my work? I mean, there's so many. I mean, trying to rationalize what these offenders and what their fantasy is. Was it for him to put fear in the community? Was it so that he could go by and watch these victims' families suffer? I mean, we're talking about monsters, and they're what drives them, and what pleasures they reap from their evil deeds. And so, I mean, you know, there's probably 50 different ways that I can't even describe of why he may have wanted to do that.
Jaime, what are your thoughts? What do you think is the reason why he did that?
I think he went to see and marvel at his crime and see that what is law enforcement's doing. Where are they in the investigation? And but that, you know, that's very basic. But he may be even more evil than that and want to see the other stuff also.
Yeah, same here, man. I think the fact that he went back would have been for just to see to see if they already discovered the bodies. You know, maybe he gets a thrill. They get people, or serial killers get thrills out of that. Or murderers, you know, they get thrills out of, you know, seeing their crimes being, assessed and whatnot. Drink. But yeah, or either that, or I mean, a lot of people are suggesting that, are saying that also maybe he tried to get back. He remembered the sheath itself. But for me, I think it would have been just to go see if they already discovered the bodies.
Yeah.
So for me, I have to fall back on the profile of who this guy is. He's a very intelligent person. You know, he saw somebody supposedly, allegedly, possibly as he walked out of that room. So I'm thinking that the thought process there is that police were probably called fairly soon and that there should be some sort of media coverage. And he can't necessarily search, Idaho murders or any of those things, especially if the crime hasn't been discovered. So he has to go back and actually see what's going on and visually get a look at it. And, when people say, is he the inside looking? Is he Papa Rogers? I never subscribed to any of those things because I felt that this person was so intelligent that they wouldn't fall under the normal, red flags that are going to be there. Is he going to go back multiple times? He went back that morning, but once the scene was discovered, according to the probable cause affidavit, he never went back. That's something that is usually not very common in these type of situations with some of these guys. So I didn't think that he would have inserted himself into the crime in this new way of, Reddit and 4chan and all these other places. But I think that was the reason why he couldn't search it. He had to go back to see what was going on. And to his surprise, there's nothing there. None yet. And so that's my thoughts as far as the reasoning why he went back.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if law enforcement had that, he woke up that morning and searched homicides in in Idaho, that that would have been that's a very good point, that he knew that he couldn't do that, so he had to drive back. Good observation.
Thank you. And the one thing that also is going to, I think, be one of his downfalls is he's going to have, he's new to the area, so he drove around. He had to have driven around that back area, that route that he had taken, so he wouldn't get and turn around. So there's going to be evidence of that, and he's probably going to try to say that's a pattern. However, he was only there for 4 months. 75% of the time he did it, but 25% of the time he stopped, and that 25% of the time happened after the murders. I think that's another big telltale sign. Let's continue. Mark asks, when collecting blood with a swab kit, does the kit require special handling after it's sealed, or can it be labeled, bagged with other evidence? Good question.
Oh, yeah. Everything's separated, all evidence. You try to make it as remote and inaccessible. When first time I took evidence to the FBI lab, their standards of what they do at the FBI lab is far more restrictive than what we did. You had to take a box and you had to seal every opening, every edge, every that all corners of the lid and box, and everything had to be sealed with tape. Whereas with us, simple paper bag inside a box with just the lids taped one time down the middle was enough for our evidence room, but it's not for. But yes, you try to make it as where it cannot have any chance of cross contamination as much as possible.
Yeah, 100%. I know when I joined the force, I didn't go down any crime scene investigation stuff, but during the academy, they taught us how to do certain things. Quick story though. It just kind of popped into my head. There was one time we had a burglary, and my FTO, my training officer, was showing me how to collect blood because the person had shattered the window and climbed through and cut his arm. And my training officer gets a swab. He swabs the blood. He's like, all right, this is how you do it. And he pulls a swab right in front of him. And it's just as he does that, a big old drop of sweat lands right on the swab. And he's like, well, and that's not how you collect it either.
Oh, I've been there. I've been there. Some of the things that happen, you just shake your head. And I've been in crime scenes, and you look over there and you're in shock of what your witnesses, that your partner's doing. And then he looks at you and he gives you that nod. Oh man, I have messed up over here big time. And I mean, things happen, and that's, and you try to minimize those, but things happen. I mean, we're human.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Why not test any DNA found in that area that could suggest more than one person? Am I wrong to think that? I'm pretty sure that they, tested every area. And I think that what you're referencing is, it's not so much that they didn't test the two DNA samples that are unknown to us. I think that the workup may have even been done, but who's to say that the prosecution has it? Because prosecution doesn't have Bryan Kohberger's workup. That was all done by the FBI.
Yeah.
So
and the interesting point on this, and this is another great question that she has here, that you have all this blood pattern, and this is where the blood pattern analysis of trained individuals stand out. That you have this scene, and you may have, in each cast off, you may have 50 blood droplets, and you may have blood spatter where certain blood droplets are on a wall from some type of impact. And you're looking at this, that you have this impact stain. So we have to collect a DNA sample from it. And you may have this cast off. So we got to collect a DNA sample from it because it's two different patterns. And then you look for the ones that are out outliers that have nothing to do with what you see. And those are the ones that really stand out, that you have a blood trail that there's no fight over here, but we have a 90-degree blood droplet or trail blood droplets that isn't from one of the victims or shouldn't be there. Then we're looking at a type of blood stain that can be collected that might be the offender's, that he has sustained some type of injury. And so that's where the analysis and trying to figure out, because it's extremely difficult to do so, but you're trained to look for those identifying blood droplets that's not associated with the victims. And you want those that are indicative that, okay, this blood droplet's found 50 feet outside the house. How did it get here? It has to be here from some type of sustained injury to the offender. And are you lucky enough to find one? Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not.
Yeah, 100%. You know, you can't. I think people think that every square inch of that house was swabbed, and I don't think that's the case, right?
I'm pretty sure that they will have tried to identify every pattern that they could identify, just like I said, and got at least one sample from each of those. I honestly believe that's what they would have done, and I'm hoping that's what they did. And but I would imagine that yes, that you would be able to see that once the contact was made and the homicides began with an edged weapon, that every time that you pull that weapon back and every time you exert any force going after another victim, you're going to have some type of cast off.
Yeah. Banda, I hope I pronounced that right, says, Steve, do you think he put a camera in the house or been in the house when everyone was out?
I think the routers and stuff, what type of camera could it be? And there's a lot of cameras out there that, but they normally either have to be cloud connected, cell phone connected, or on some type of router. And so there would be a signature either through the cell towers or otherwise for him to be able to do any of that. And I don't believe, I think that would be something that they would have found pretty readily.
Good deal. Thank you, Lona, for gifting one Drunk Turkey Show membership. We appreciate that. Paul says, thank you for the additional information. I'm trying to understand many aspects of this case. When you think of planning, it just seems like that one would be important. Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of questions that come in when it comes to like, this guy's intelligent, but he left the sheath. He kept his phone. He, turned his phone on. He, did all these mistakes. Like I said, when you look at the probable cause affidavit, there's a big difference when, you're planning something and you're executing something. The planning part has less stress, has less, everything. It's not as a stressful situation. As soon as that action goes into plan and we see, after 4:00, just in his driving habits, things were going awry. So, I would assume that things would probably get even more chaotic as soon as he entered that building.
Yeah. BTK was out there for 30 years and he never committed a perfect crime. He was still messing up years into it. It's just until technology caught up.
And even if he hadn't messed up with the making contact with that flop, by now they would have found him with his DNA.
Yeah, definitely.
Vixter asked, how close was the phone pings? Are you familiar with the FBI's ability to get locations on people?
I did a show on that. I can't remember of what the little name of their self-service investigative team was, but I read up on it a little bit, and it's amazing. And I don't know how precise it will be. I don't know how many towers are dedicated to just that in certain areas, but hopefully they have enough information.
So Angel D asks, is it okay to transfer evidence in the back of an open truck like the mattresses? So there has been some images that appear that there's some mattresses in an open bed of a truck. What are your thoughts on that transportation of that evidence?
Well, when I first saw that, I had to figure out what was the timeline on this, for the fact that the records and the collection of evidence in each room would show what was the condition of the bedding, how many layers. I mean, do we have a top blanket, top sheet, bottom sheet, mattress protector, box spring protector, and were those items removed and collected and sealed and preserved for evidence? Now we have mattresses that have all these layers of clothing or protective layers on them that we don't have hair and fiber that would have been able to go through. So if everything's been removed and they've gone in there and they may have used forensic light sources, alternate light sources, and they've sprayed it with chemicals and they've used filters and there's no more evidence there, then yes, if there's box springs aren't going, if they have all the best evidence and all the evidence that would be on those upper layers, the box springs and the mattress itself probably has no evidential value.
Good deal. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely does. Thank you, Sheza Banda, for your $5 super sticker.
Thank you.
I'll ask, what is a latent print?
Okay. A little bit different spelling, but it's a print that is invisible, that or is hard. It's left on surfaces, a latent print versus other prints, but you process them with powders, you make them visible, and you lift them, and it's just a fingerprint that's left. Look at the glass. When you take a drink of water, look at your glass under lighting, and you'll be able to see some of those latent prints that you left on your own drinking glasses.
Yeah, 100%. Those are, yeah. Let me see. I'm gonna go through.
They're hard to see, but you can see them. They're not absolutely invisible.
Steve, I had a question. What are your thoughts about the talk about demolishing the house at one point?
Well, like I said, from reading and understanding that due to the chemicals and that it's a health hazard, I think that's the reason why. But I don't understand why they would do it before court. Why not just seal it up until? But now it may be such a health hazard that you can't even let a juror in there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's safe to do a walkthrough for the jury itself?
It may, they may have to ventilate
it. Glass asked, and I know you had some experience in corrections. When it comes to a prisoner who is high profile like this, who has been charged with a couple of murders or multiple homicides, how are they handled in the prison? Are they separated from other prisoners? Is there a chance that you would try to put them in with somebody that you would think would be a snitch?
Well, there's all kinds of strategies out there. And sometimes you have these high profiles that you'll put them in certain parts of the population, and you have to put them in once they're classified, you have to put them within a classification that you can't take some extremely dangerous individual and put him in there with people caught for jaywalking. Right. We have to have a separation of the masses, and then you put them in that there are some of these high profile offenders that you put them in the right environment, and you'll have people that just want to get a reputation, and you may lose a offender or someone accused of a crime. So there's a lot of solitary confinement for their own protection of some of these high profile cases. And if he's intelligent and everything, he knows that whatever he says is going to get back, because these guys, professional snitches and otherwise, I mean, how many times we see movies, and now does it occur that you have these people that brag? Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And this is going to be the last question that we take for the night. Do you think he watched the Grub Truck live stream to know where the victims were? I don't. I personally don't, just because I think that there would be some sort of digital evidence of that. I think there was a 9-minute time where he stopped, where he's on cameras, on WSU cameras for 9 minutes, or he passed by WSU and then came back 9 minutes later. I think at that point, if he had some sort of like burner device, that he may have done some of the stalking, make sure that his victims were home. But I'm not entirely sure he actually watched the Grub Truck live stream. He would have had to have known that they were going to head that direction. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
You convinced me tonight of something I hadn't considered, that he, if smart enough, that didn't. That's how come he had to drive back to the scene. So kudos for that. And that falls right in line that he wouldn't watch the anything that would link him to that community.
Yeah, I think so too. What about you, Jaime?
Same, man. I don't think if he went through all the trouble, with his attire and everything, I'm sure he wouldn't go through and see the Grub Truck live stream and get that on his devices. You know what I mean?
Well, there's that, and he'd also have to have knowledge that they were going there. So he would have had to have been watching them at the corner club.
Stalking.
Yeah, to an extreme extent. So I don't think there's any video or anything like that at the corner club that he could have been watching. Steve, I want to. Oh, go ahead, Jaime.
I had one more question for Steve, and it has nothing to do. With the cases itself, but Steve, what's your opinion on serial killers? Do you think they are born or they are made?
I think both, from both ends, they come, are from both parts of society. Now psychopaths are supposedly born, but I think that certain individuals can be driven to that same level through certain environmental conditions. And both of them are just as dangerous regardless.
Yeah.
Because I spoke to probably one of the most evil individuals I ever spoke to, was we had went to arrest him. He was out of Florida, and he was on parole and for a homicide. And I asked him about it as we was taking him to jail, of who he had killed, and he said that this lady had knocked on his motel room, and he had killed her. And I said, "You killed her for knocking on your door? You killed a stranger?" And he said, "Oh no, we talked for 2 or 3 hours." And like that was okay, that he knew her. And now how she was restrained for 2 or 3 hours, I didn't ask, but that's the mentality of some of these individuals. They just absolutely true evil, that life means nothing to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for coming on. We appreciate you've had extremely expertise information that really did help us out in both cases to understand certain things from a criminal scene investigative perspective. If you guys aren't following Steve at True Crime Web, go check out his YouTube channel. It's at True Crime Web. He has 11.3K subscribers. Let's get him up to 12K. Let him know that Drunk Turkey Show sent y'all. Do you have any final words or questions for us, Steve?
No, I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the awareness you bring to this community and this platform you have. You're doing, like I said, I'm honored to be here. I never expected it, and thank you for having me. And absolutely, if there's anything I can ever do for y'all, never hesitate.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll have you back on for sure yet again. I'm going to end the stream. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk a little bit afterwards. You guys have a great night. We'll see you all later. Jaime, send us out.
Thank you, everyone. Subs, new members, Steve, of course, mods, and whatnot, and things of that nature. If you're all drinking, I'm gonna say, just keep on saying it until they get drunk. Whatnot.